Laugh surprised me. Not a happy laugh, more like the kind that escapes when something is so absurd your body doesn't know what else to do. I was standing at my kitchen counter in my bathrobe at 7:40 in the morning, holding a certified letter from the Multnomah County Circuit Court and laughing alone in my kitchen like a man who'd finally lost it. My left hand was still shaking from the Parkinson's tremors that had been getting worse since spring. The letter said my ex-wife was suing me for stalking. My name is Douglas Mercer. I'm 64 years old. I'm 64 years old. I spent 31 years building a commercial refrigeration company in Portland, Oregon. I lost that company, my savings, and my marriage in roughly the same 18-month window between 2020 and 2022, and I thought I genuinely believed that the worst of it was behind me. Then that envelope arrived. I should back up and explain what was happening to me physically, because without that context, none of what follows makes any sense. In January of last year, my neurologist at OHSU, Dr. Feynman, sat me down and told me that the tremors in my left hand weren't going away on their own. The Parkinson's diagnosis had come 8 months earlier, but we'd been managing it with medication and hoping for stability. What we got instead was progression. By February, I was having freezing episodes, moments where my legs simply stopped cooperating, mid-step, as though someone had hit a pause button on my body. I fell twice in 1 week. The second time, I caught the edge of the bathroom counter on the way down and cracked 2 ribs. My daughter Sasha drove me to the ER. I spent 4 days admitted, then transferred to a rehabilitation facility in Beaverton, where they adjusted my medications and started me on a specialized physical therapy program. I was there for 11 weeks. 11 weeks? I could not drive. I could not travel. Some mornings I needed help cutting my own food. That's who I was when my ex-wife filed a lawsuit claiming I had been following her. The complaint was detailed. Disturbingly detailed. It said I had appeared outside her Pilates studio in Eugene on 3 separate occasions in March and April. It said I had been seen near her apartment complex in the Pearl District twice in February. It said I had sent her 22 text messages over a 6-week period that were described in the legal language as threatening and emotionally coercive. Our attorney, a man named Philip Sato, had attached a photograph to the filing. One photograph, printed in color on standard paper, showing a man standing across the street from what appeared to be a storefront. The man was heavy-set, gray-bearded, wearing a dark green jacket. He was caught in three-quarter profile, face partially visible. He looked enough like me to make my stomach turn. I called my attorney, a woman named Beverly Cross, within the hour. Beverly had handled my divorce proceedings and knew the entire timeline of what had happened with my health. I read her the complaint over the phone slowly, because my hands were still shaking. "Douglas," she said when I finished, "where were you during every single one of these dates? In a rehab facility in Beaverton, or the hospital before that? Do you have documentation? 11 weeks of it. Then this gets dismissed. But we need to move carefully. Tell me about the photograph." I described the man in it. The green jacket, the build, the beard. I told her he looked like he could be my brother, except I don't have a brother. "Send me everything," she said, "and start pulling your records, discharge papers, the rehab facility's daily logs, everything you can get your hands on." That evening, I sat at my kitchen table and looked at the photograph for a long time. The resemblance was real. Same broad shoulders, same gray beard cut close to the jaw, but something bothered me about the image that I couldn't immediately name. I'd been doing physical therapy for months by then, walking on posture and gait because Parkinson's has a way of pulling you forward, curling you inward. My therapist had been drilling me constantly about keeping my chin up and my shoulders back. The man in the photograph stood differently than I did. His weight was on his heels. His chin was tucked. It was subtle, not something most people would notice. But to me, after months of staring at my own posture in therapy mirrors, it read wrong. I set the photograph down and started making calls. The rehabilitation facility, Cascade Recovery Center, was thorough in its record keeping. My care coordinator, a woman I just called Miss Nguyen, helped me request the full documentation. It took 4 business days and a small administrative fee, but what came back was comprehensive. Daily therapy notes, medication logs recorded every 8 hours, meal records, visitor sign-in sheets, security badge swipes at the facility entrance, physiotherapy session timestamps with my therapist's initials on each entry. On every date listed in my ex-wife's complaint, I had been present at Cascade Recovery Center, logged in the system, attended scheduled sessions, and in 2 cases, had appointments with Dr. Feynman himself, who drove out from OHSU for patient consultations. I had been physically incapable of being in Eugene or the Pearl District on any of those dates. The freezing episodes alone made unsupervised travel impossible, let alone a 2-hour drive to Eugene. Beverly reviewed everything and scheduled a preliminary call with Philip Sato's office. I listened in. Mr. Sato, Beverly said, my client was a resident at Cascade Recovery Center, a Parkinson's rehabilitation facility, during every date referenced in your complaint. We have approximately 300 pages of documentation confirming his presence, daily physical condition, and medical treatment. He was assessed as unable to operate a motor vehicle for the entire duration of your alleged incidents. Sato's response was measured. We have a photograph missions, cross, and multiple witness accounts. 2 people identified your client near the Pilates studio. We also have the text records. Witnesses who identified someone who looked like my client, Beverly said. There's a meaningful legal distinction, and I'd like to discuss the texts because my client denies sending them, and we intend to pull carrier records. The texts came from his number. I spoke up then. I hadn't planned to, but I couldn't stop myself. I sent my ex-wife exactly 3 messages between January and May. Once to let her know about my diagnosis. Once to ask about some tax documents that were still in her possession. Once to thank her when she dropped off some of my things at my daughter's house. Sato paused. We'll note your denial for the record. After the call, Beverly was quiet for a moment. Someone spoofed your number. That's the only explanation that fits. We need your carrier records. I requested them from Verizon that afternoon. While I waited, I started thinking. Not about who had sent the texts, I was still working on that, but about the photograph. That photograph kept pulling at something in the back of my mind. My ex-wife and I had separated in 2022. The marriage hadn't ended with a single dramatic moment. It had eroded. 30 years of building something together, and then the business collapsed in the pandemic and we both turned into different, harder people in the rubble. By the time she asked for the divorce, we were strangers who had run out of patience with each other. We weren't enemies. We weren't friends. We were 2 people who had signed papers and gone separate directions. So why was she doing this? My daughter Sasha came over for dinner 3 nights after I received the complaint. She was 32, lived in Portland, worked in healthcare administration. She was the one person who had been with me through every terrible chapter of the past 3 years. She knew my medical situation better than anyone. She also, as it turned out, knew something I didn't. Dad, she said carefully, midway through dinner, I need to tell you something about Mom. Sasha had run into her mother at a farmer's market in September. They talked briefly. My ex-wife had mentioned she was seeing someone new, a man she'd met through a mutual friend at a community garden event. Someone she seemed, in Sasha's words, a little too eager to talk about. Did she say his name? I asked. Something like Ted or Todd. I wasn't paying close attention. I remember thinking he sounded kind of intense the way she described him. I didn't think much of it at the time. My ex-wife was allowed to date. I had no claim on her life. But a week later, when the Verizon records arrived and confirmed what I had suspected, that only 3 outgoing messages to her number appeared on my account, not 22. I started thinking about that farmer's market conversation differently. I went back through the photograph. I pulled up on my laptop and zoomed in as far as the resolution would allow. The man's jacket had a small logo on the left breast pocket. It was blurry, but it looked like it might be a brand name or possibly a business logo. I printed it and took it to a print shop near my apartment who had better magnification equipment than anything I owned. The shop owner squinted at it for a long minute. That's a Deschutes outdoor supply jacket, he said. I've got one in the back. They do custom embroidery, sell them mostly in Bend, a city 3 hours south of Portland. I called Beverly and told her what I'd found. She told me she was already working on something. She had a contact, a former law enforcement investigator named Phil Garnett, who had done work for her on a previous case. Phil had done 2 years as a detective with the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office before going private. Beverly had brought him in quietly. Phil Garnett called me 2 days later. He had a flat, unhurried voice, the kind that came from years of having difficult conversations without letting them become emotional. Tell me about this man your ex-wife is seeing, he said. I told him what Sasha had told me. The community garden, the name that might be Ted or Todd. I found him, Phil said. Todd Wren, 57 years old, lives in Bend, Oregon, but he's been spending a lot of time in Portland in the past several months. What do you know about him? Enough to be concerned. He has a civil harassment restraining order on his record from Klamath Falls 2019. A woman he'd been in a relationship with filed against him. That case settled out of court. Before that, he had a similar situation in Reno, Nevada in 2016. Same pattern. He entered a relationship. The relationship ended badly. The ex-partner filed for protection. Both times, someone in the woman's life was simultaneously being accused of harassment. I went cold. He does this with the ex, I said. It wasn't really a question. It appears so. He identifies someone from the target's past. Someone with history. Someone who looks enough like him that photographs could be misleading. And he sets that person up. Makes the target afraid. Keeps her dependent on him. He looks like me. He's your height and build. Grey beard. Similar coloring. In a photograph taken at distance with the right clothing, it would be hard to tell you apart unless you knew what to look for. My mind ran back to the jacket. The dissuade's outdoor supply jacket from Bend. Frill, I said. The photograph attached to the lawsuit. The man is wearing a jacket from a supply store in Bend. A pause. Then, that's useful. The Verizon records had already shown that the 22 texts to my ex-wife had not come from my account. Beverly filed a motion requesting the originating carrier data for those messages. The cell tower pings, the actual device information. If Todd Wren had used the spoofing service to fake my number, there would be a technical trail. These services route calls and texts through their own servers, and those servers leave logs. In the meantime, Phil was running surveillance on Todd. Within a week, he had something. Todd Wren drove a gray Subaru Outback registered in Deschutes County. Phil had photographed him entering a costume and theatrical supply shop in southeast Portland. He had purchased, according to the shop's receipt records obtained through a subpoena, Beverly filed in conjunction with the harassment claim we were now building, a hairpiece and a prosthetic beard kit. A clear prosthetic beard kit. Beverly called Philip Sato and requested a settlement conference. She didn't tell him what we had. She simply said there were significant evidentiary issues with the complaint that warranted direct discussion before the matter proceeded further. The meeting was at a conference room in a downtown Portland office building. My ex-wife was there. She looked tired, the kind of tired that comes from months of fear, not just one bad night. Todd Wren sat beside her. He was shorter than I'd imagined from the description, built thickly through the chest and shoulders, with dark hair going grey at the temples. He looked nothing like the man in the photograph. That man had been him in a disguise designed to look like me. I had not been in the same room as my ex-wife since we signed the divorce papers. Beverly laid out our case methodically. The rehabilitation facility records. The Verizon logs showing only 3 messages. The motion for carrier-level data on the spoofed texts. Phil's findings on Todd Wren's history in Klamath Falls and Reno. The receipt from the theatrical supply shop. The Deschutes outdoor supply jacket. My ex-wife's face changed as Beverly spoke. I watched it happen. Confusion first, then something slower and more painful. The expression of a person whose certainty about their own experience is being dismantled piece by piece, and they don't yet know whether to feel relieved or devastated. She looked at Todd. He kept his expression neutral, supportive, patient, the practiced look of a man who had done this before. These are serious allegations against Mr. Wren, Philip Sato said. Do you have direct evidence placing him at the locations in question? We have evidence of him purchasing materials consistent with the disguise worn by the man in your photograph, Beverly said. We have his documented history of identical behavior in 2 prior relationships. We have carrier data requests pending that we expect will show the originating device for those 22 texts was not my client's phone. And we have Phil Garnett, who will testify that over the past 3 weeks he witnessed Mr. Wren conducting surveillance on my client's daughter on 2 separate occasions. That last part hit the room like a slap. My ex-wife turned to Todd. You were watching Sasha? That's not, he started. She's my daughter, my ex-wife said. Her voice had gone quiet, which in my experience of 30 years with this woman was more alarming than if she had shouted. Phil Garnett came in then. He had been waiting in the hallway, same as Marcus Webb had waited in the video that had inspired this one. And he placed a folder on the conference table. Inside were photographs taken over the past 3 weeks. Todd Wren parked outside Sasha's apartment building. Todd Wren in a grey Subaru 2 blocks from Sasha's workplace. Todd Wren, on one occasion, following Sasha's car from her neighborhood to a grocery store in St. John's. My daughter didn't know. She had no idea. Todd stood up. He said something about defamation, about false accusations, about having nothing to do with any of this. His voice was controlled, but his hands weren't. They were flat on the conference table, and the tendons in his forearms were tight. Sit down, Mr. Wren, Beverly said mildly. or the two detectives standing outside this building will come in and make it significantly more difficult for you. He sat down. The full picture came out over the following weeks through the police investigation, the carrier data, and what my ex-wife eventually told detectives herself. Todd Wren had found her online 6 months before they met in person. He had researched her. Social media, public records, the divorce filing, which is part of the public court record in Oregon. He'd learned about me, about the marriage, about the business failure, and my health decline. He positioned himself at the community garden event through a mutual acquaintance he'd cultivated for exactly that purpose. He presented himself as patient, stable, financially comfortable, everything she had wanted and hadn't had in the final years of our marriage. But Todd Wren had a pathology. He had done this 3 times before that Phil could document, and possibly more. He became obsessively threatened by the existence of any previous relationship in his partner's life. He didn't want to compete. He wanted to eliminate, and his method was always the same. Build a legal case against the ex-partner, make the woman afraid, make her dependent on him for protection from a threat he had manufactured. He had chosen me specifically because I was sick, because I was in a rehabilitation facility 3 hours from Eugene with a progressive neurological condition. Because he believed that a man with Parkinson's tremors and no income and no company behind him would have neither the resources nor the stamina to fight back. He had looked at me and seen someone who couldn't defend himself. He was wrong about that. The spoofing service records, obtained through Beverly's subpoena, confirmed that every one of the 22 texts to my ex-wife had originated from a prepaid device registered to an address in Bend that turned out to be a UPS store mailbox. The cell tower data placed the originating device in Portland on dates when I had been verifiably present at Cascade Recovery Center across town. The criminal charges against Todd Wren included identity fraud, criminal harassment, stalking, and tampering with evidence. The detective assigned to the case told Beverly that when they searched his apartment in Bend, they found a box containing my ex-wife's schedule going back 11 months. Notes on her routines, photographs of her apartment building, a printed copy of my divorce filing with my name circled in red ink. He had been planning this before they even met. My ex-wife called me from her sister's house in Ashton 3 weeks after the conference room. I was in the middle of a physiotherapy session and had to call her back. We talked for almost 2 hours, the longest real conversation we'd had since before the business fell apart. She told me she had been terrified for months, that she had genuinely believed I was following her, that the man she had loved for 30 years had become someone frightening, that believing that had felt like losing the marriage all over again but worse. Because at least during the divorce, she had known who I was. I told her about the nights in the rehabilitation facility, lying awake after lights out, wondering if I was going to spend the rest of my deteriorating years defending myself from an accusation I had no idea how to explain. Wondering if my own children might start to doubt me. Wondering if this was what the end of a life looked like. Not the disease itself, but the isolation it invited. She cried. I didn't, but it was close. The lawsuit was withdrawn in October. Beverly filed a civil action against Todd Wren for damages, defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, identity fraud. He had no meaningful assets, so we will almost certainly never see a dollar of it. But it is in the record now. His name attached to what he did in permanent black and white. Todd made bail and then immediately violated the conditions of his release by attempting to contact my ex-wife through a third party. His bail was revoked. His attorney told Beverly he was looking at a minimum of 4 years and potentially 8 or more once the out-of-state violations were factored in. My ex-wife moved temporarily to Ashland to stay with her sister. We exchange messages occasionally. They are brief, careful, not unfriendly. The marriage is over and will stay that way. 30 years of shared history doesn't unhappen just because you both survived something terrible together. But I no longer feel like her enemy. I don't think she feels like mine either. My Parkinson's is managed for now. The medication adjustment they made at Cascade has reduced the freezing episodes. I walk 45 minutes every morning, slowly, but I walk. I've been doing consulting work for a younger refrigeration contractor who needs someone with my experience and doesn't need me to climb any ladders. It's not what I built, but it's something, and some mornings that's enough. What I've thought about most, since all of this was over, is how precisely Todd Wren had calculated my helplessness. He had looked at my medical records, publicly accessible through court filings in the divorce, and he had looked at my financial situation, and he had concluded that I was finished. A man with a degenerative neurologic condition and a dissolved company and a failed marriage, alone in a rehabilitation facility. He had expected me to either settle quietly or crumble publicly. What he hadn't factored in was Beverly Cross, who has been practicing civil litigation in Oregon for 26 years and does not accept cases she doesn't intend to win. What he hadn't factored in was Phil Garnett, who spent 2 decades in law enforcement and takes a certain professional pleasure in dismantling careful plans. What he hadn't factored in was my daughter Sasha, who showed up at the rehabilitation facility twice a week without being asked and kept me connected to the world outside those walls. And what he hadn't factored in was the basic stubbornness of a man who spent 31 years running a business in a brutally competitive industry and learned long ago that you do not let other people write the ending of your story. The tremor in my left hand is still there. Some days it's worse than others. I've stopped being angry about it. Anger burns energy I need for other things. There is a kind of clarity that comes from having your worst nightmare arrive by certified mail and discovering that you are, in fact, still capable of fighting it. Not gracefully, not without help, but capable. There's something I find myself saying now when the topic comes up with people going through hard things. And at 64, with the friends in the life I have, it comes up more than you'd think. The people who want to harm you often choose their moment carefully. They wait until you're down. They calculate your defenses and find the gaps. What they almost never calculate is that being down is not the same as being done, that the receipts you didn't know you were collecting, the therapy logs, the medication records, the timestamp on every ordinary Tuesday morning can become the architecture of your defense. That the truth, properly documented, is more durable than any lie, no matter how elaborately constructed. My left hand is shaking as I type this. It shakes most mornings. I type anyway. The thing about Todd Lynn that I keep coming back to, and I've had a lot of quiet mornings to think about it, is that he wasn't stupid. He was careful. He studied the situation the way a contractor studies a building before he decides where to start tearing it down. He found the weakest point, which was me, alone in a rehabilitation facility with a degenerative condition and no company behind me, and he built his plan around the assumption that weakness was permanent. That's where he miscalculated. And I think that miscalculation says something true about how cause and effect actually works in a person's life, even when everything looks like it's falling apart. He chose me because I was down, but being down had also forced me to become meticulous in ways I never would have been otherwise. 11 weeks in a rehabilitation facility teaches you to pay attention to small things. The timestamp on a therapy session, the nurse's initials on a medication log, the specific date a doctor drove out from the hospital to check on you. I wasn't collecting evidence. I was just living my life in a documented, supervised, thoroughly recorded way. Todd built a trap using the assumption that a sick man leaves no footprints. What he didn't know was that sick men in modern medical facilities leave nothing but footprints. There's a version of the story where I don't fight back, where the tremor in my hand and the exhaustion of the past 3 years and the sheer humiliation of being accused of something like that all adds up to a man who just wants it to stop, who signs whatever needs to be signed and disappears. I understood that version of myself. I could feel him standing right behind me through a lot of those weeks. What kept me from becoming him wasn't courage exactly. It was Beverly Cross asking me one simple question on the phone. Where were you? And me realizing I could answer it completely down to the hour for every single date on that complaint. The truth was already there. It just needed someone with the patience to assemble it. I think about what Sasha went through when she found out Todd had been watching her. My daughter would spend months driving to Beaverton twice a week to sit with her father through physical therapy sessions, who had quietly kept my life from falling further apart than it already had. She had been followed to a grocery store by a man she'd never met, who saw her as a tool for controlling her mother. That is the part that still makes me angry when I let myself feel it. Not what he did to me, what he was willing to do to her. But here's what I've also seen. Looking back at all of it, the people who came through for me did so because of relationships built over years of showing up as a straight dealer. Beverly took my case seriously because I'd been honest with her throughout the divorce, even when honesty wasn't flattering to me. Phil Garnett worked that case with a thoroughness that went beyond billable hours because Beverly vouched for me. Sasha was there every week, not out of obligation, but because we had built something real between us during the years when I was too busy running a company to be a particularly good father, and then slowly repaired it after the company was gone. You cannot manufacture that network in a crisis. You either built it over years or you didn't. Todd understood leverage. He never understood that. My left hand is still shaking as I write this. I've stopped waiting for that to change. Some mornings it's worse, some mornings it's manageable, and either way I get up and put one foot in front of the other, literally and otherwise. At 64, with everything that's happened, I think that's about all any of us can really promise ourselves. Not that the hard things won't come, but that when they do, we'll still be standing there with our paperwork in order, ready to tell the truth about where we were.